Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ask a Death Doula. I am your host, Suzanne O'Brien. Today, I am thrilled about this podcast. I have been wanting to do this podcast and more research on this for a very long time. And as you know, we've been very busy. And I finally got an opportunity to have this wonderful woman on our show. So we have a lot of questions, and there's going to be an incredible amount of information that can not only change your own journey, but also the planet. And what a wonderful thing that is to come full circle. So I just want to introduce our wonderful guest, and then we'll ask our questions and have a great conversation. This is Emily Nelson. She is the founder and CEO of Be a Tree. And Be a Tree is about water cremation. So I am not going to wait any longer. We're going to jump into conversation. Welcome, Emily, and thank you for taking the time to be with me today.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I'm really pleased to be with you.
Thank you. This is going to be great. So the first thing that we have to cover is, what is a water cremation, also known, that I understand, as aquamation or alkaline hydrolysis. So if you could explain, what is a water cremation, please?
Absolutely, yes. And I'm glad you're calling it by its many names. I'll talk about what water cremation is and all of its different the vocabulary that's out there for it. So with water cremation, instead of fire as the element, we're really leveraging water as the primary element to break down a body. And the way that works is that we have a vessel, a stainless steel vessel, where the person is, prepared and loaded into a basket. That the vessel then is filled with water. And before the water comes in, we've also added a little bit of alkali. So we specifically use potassium hydroxide. And I think what's really magical about this is that it's actually the water that's doing the work of breaking down the body. The alkali that we add is just to create the right environment for the water molecule to be able to get to work. And what it does is mimics the natural decomposition process over several hours. So the specific technology that we use takes about 18 hours. It'll get up to about 199 degrees. So it's like a very warm bath. That water gently circulates that entire time and breaks down any organic materials and soft tissue. What we're left with at the end, we have the water, the liquid byproduct, which drains into a separate holding space. And then we have any skeletal remains and implants. So the skeletal remains are, in our case, we essentially lay them out on trays where they air dry for a couple of days. Once they're completely dry, they go into a remains processor that any crematory would have on site. So they are kind of pulverized before they go into the urn for the family. Any implants that were there can be recycled. So if there's metals or dental fillings, whatever there is, we can recycle those or safely dispose of them if needed. So that's another great way that we're able to keep everything there rather than it going up into the air, especially with things like mercury, which were commonly used in dental fillings. The water that's left then is a sterile mixture of really our most basic building blocks. So it's, amino acids, peptides, sugars, salts. We kind of have just been broken down to what we're made of at the end of the day. We're already majority of our body's water. And so we're just adding more. There's no DNA left in that solution because of the reaction that's occurred. And it's very nutritious. So I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot more, but what we do with it and what kind of sets us apart at Be a Tree is we're land applying this water as a fertilizer because it's so nutritious. So rather than putting it down the drain, which is a completely safe alternative, we thought it was very important to us that it actually goes back to the land, and really gets at our core belief that you can live on through nature after death.
You can. Oh my God. I'm so excited. All right. So many questions, but so excited about this. Okay. So it's very interesting because as I do continuing education webinars, when I did one on how to donate your body, and I thought, that was really a nice option. You can continue on and all of that. And then now with the water cremation, I'm like, no, I want to be, because I want to be a tree, and I want to still contribute. And I think that it's so empowering, the decisions that we still have, even after we're not here, that we can make while we're here, but even after, that we can contribute to the health of the planet and to society. And it looks like everything that you're talking about, which we'll sort of break down, is this full circle and cycle of positivity, because now I didn't even really understand the nutritious part of the water content at the end that can be used as fertilizer. And so, as you can see, it's just like gotten even better. So it's really wonderful. I have been doing end of life education for almost 2 decades now. And obviously, if we don't talk about end of life, death is the number one fear. We lack planning, and we lack conversations about options. And so many people were, and still are, under the false perception that embalming is required by law, and there's only really one way to do this. Or when we don't find out options, then we kind of just follow suit in that one way. And that one way is detrimental. Well, there's so many things that are challenging, and there's no judgment here, but I think it's time for us to really start to wake up on all levels of what we can do to make this world a better place for humans, for animals, for the planet, that we're all ultimately connected.
Yes.
And this is I really feel that this is going to be the predominant choice that people make as they hear about it, just because of what you said. And so I'd like to compare a couple of things. So let's just define again the different names that this is called. Aquamation, which I really kind of like because it reminds me of the beach, but that's cool. Water cremation is great too. And I also want to highlight what you said, that this mimics the natural way that we have our decomposition of this body. And isn't it great to go back to natural? Like, isn't that one of the best things we can do? So what are the other names, that just so we don't have anyone missing out on what this is?
Yes, I think that's important, because I think that's part of the reason why there's been kind of the slower adoption, right? Because we don't have a common vocabulary to refer to it. So, scientifically and legally, it's always going to be called alkaline hydrolysis, because that's actually what's happening, right? Like that's the name of the reaction that takes place. And so if you're ever advocating for this where you live, alkaline hydrolysis is what would be in the bill or the legislation to get this approved. However, it's been called many things. I've heard it called biocremation, aquamation, green cremation. There's sort of all these different things out there. And so we chose water cremation because those are 2 words that people already know. It's not cremation by the scientific definition of cremation, which involves heat and fire. And though it still makes it clear to people that, okay, we're using water, and with cremation, I expect to get some kind of remains back in an urn. So
I love that.
Approachable.
And very, very smart. So because I've heard it as alkaline hydrolysis, obviously, but as water cremation and then aquamation. So we really want to make sure that our messaging is nice and clear so that people can step into this space. So that's one of the first things. And I love that you picked water cremation. I think it's fantastic. And I love that. I want to share with the listeners for a minute on your path to this space, because I was so moved reading your story and your bio about your mother, who had her end of life when I think you were just a little over a year old. And that you then questioned and were a seeker, because trying to make sense probably, and put on a path that most people are not put on. And it's amazing the gifts of our lives, what is a gift, because it's not a gift to obviously have our mother leaving this planet at an early age, but what it birthed in you, or the gift that it gave you to be able to then give other people, is absolutely tremendous. And then I love your stepmom. So if you could just share for our listeners how you got so passionate, and why you're on the path to change this, because it's such a beautiful story.
Yes, absolutely. But I love to share this story, and I love the demonstration that it creates around legacy,
Yeah.
and how our legacies are so intertwined and ever evolving. Our legacies can still evolve even after we die, which is really what's happening with my mother right now. So
Yes.
my birth mother, she passed from suicide when I was about 1.5 years. And so I think that kind of brought death into my field just at a really early age, and had always been very curious about it on a more esoteric level and what that meant.
Yeah.
And so of course I wouldn't really know how that would impact my life until a lot further down the line, when I'm an adult. But I eventually ended up working for a death care corporation, one of the bigger chains that serves the US and Canada. And that was kind of my first peek behind the curtain of how we were handling death care. And from that, I was extremely fortunate. My father remarried when I was about 4 years old, and she ended up legally adopting me. So when I say mom, that's who I'm referring to, because she's an incredible woman that really has been my mother figure. And so I was then talking with her about what she would want and telling her about some of the green alternatives. And she said, well, I want to be a tree. And so I probed a little bit more. I said, well, that's great. So we can do a green burial for you. And she said, no, I want to be cremated. And so that was sort of that light bulb moment for me of realizing the same people who are choosing cremation, which are now a majority of people, are also the same ones who do care about the environment and want to go back to nature. And so that is what eventually led me to water cremation, because it fits both of those solutions. It fits the living on through nature and the caring for our planet box.
I love it. And I will tell you that the millennials now, people are waking up. This is our moment. And this is our moment to rewrite the script. Look at and no judgment here, but things that weren't working and fitting in boxes, we're throwing that out, and we're like, this is our moment. And if we don't get it right now, obviously there's already very heavy repercussions happening, but this is our chance to do it. So this is a big part of that. And I love how you said, and what I personally found out is that so many of my, and again, when we don't talk about end of life being a natural part of the life cycle, when it shows up, everyone's scrambling, and it usually obviously doesn't go well. Most of my families were under, again, the false perception that cremation, and again, it's probably environmentally more friendly, obviously, than being embalmed and put in a non-biodegradable casket. However, there is a lot of impact on the environment from fire cremation. So when we have this conversation and when we share, and again, I love a win-win-win situation, and I feel like the water cremations are that. If we could break down, if so gently, into the comparisons, again, there's never any judgment here, but we want people to be able to understand the choices. Environmental impact on a embalmed body and again, no judgment, in a non-biodegradable casket, which I don't think our earth can handle too much more. And there's no judgment. Anyone can pick what they want, just informed decision-making. Of a fire cremation, because again, you talked about the mercury with the ozone, and then of a water cremation. So just from an environmental standpoint, those three choices.
Yes. And I love your point about, I think we can look with a critical eye at the larger trends without judging individual choices. And that's really what we're here to do. So starting with traditional burial, that one of the things that I was really astounded by when I started working in the death care space was seeing that when, in most cemeteries, when you're choosing burial, a lot of the times you are embalmed. So, those are often not safe chemicals that we want to put into the ground, nor do you want to expose the workers to those chemicals long term. So often you're embalmed. You then go inside of a casket, which can be composed of wood and metal or some combination of the two. And then you go inside of a concrete vault because, and the big reason for that is because we want to keep the ground flat and we don't want it to cave in for landscaping and visual purposes. And, so that those vaults are quite standard. So the statistics I've heard were that we're burying enough concrete every year to build a highway from San Francisco to Portland. And then we're burying enough steel every year to build a Golden Gate Bridge. And then, all the deforestation that's involved in obtaining the amount of wood that we need for the caskets. And we're doing all of that just to sort of artificially preserve a body and to artificially preserve a landscape, when at the end of the day, we can't guarantee any level of preservation because eventually the water gets in or the dirt gets in and the elements will do their thing, but we're really just getting in the way of that happening in a natural way. So that's looking at burial. And then there's cremation, which in most people's minds, certainly in my mind, I saw that as being the default, like, better option from a environmental standpoint. And then though, I learned that, we have to consume fossil fuels to get those crematories hot enough to adequately burn through the body. And then we're emitting about a little over 500 pounds of CO2 for each cremation on a lot of machines. And so that's about like driving 600 miles in a standard passenger vehicle. So it's a pretty large impact for just the final thing that you will ever physically do on this earth. And that's a big impact. And not to mention, with the emissions, there can be often some toxic chemicals that are released into the air.
Right.
And then looking at water cremation, why this was so alluring to me and why I believe that it will be adopted is because we don't burn any fossil fuels. We don't have any emissions from our space. There is energy that has to be created, but it is 90% less energy compared to a fire cremation. So significantly lower footprint.
Beautiful. And then of course the remains can be fertilizer because they're so rich in, you can do whatever you want with them. You can literally be a tree, which is like so exciting. Can we talk about the comparisons? And again, I only want people to make informed, empowered decisions for themselves. And when they get information, they can do that. So what is the cost of each one average for a traditional?
Yes, of course, this varies widely, just kind of like healthcare does. The average cost of a burial is going to be, I believe, about $7,000 to $10,000, the latest estimates that I've seen. For cremation, it really varies. Again, you can, in most major cities, you can find what they call a direct cremation with no service or anything for under $1,000 a lot of the time. Whereas if you go for a cremation through like a traditional mortuary or funeral home, it's often about $2,000 or $3,000 to do it that way. By comparison, our costs, and again, varies again, but based on many providers, we are just over $2,000. So $2,450 is what our packages start at today. And we try to be very transparent about what that includes. So
I love your website. I love your website and what you offer. So that's great. So we really have a good idea of that. Okay, let's talk about legality. What is going, so did water cremation ever exist a time period ago and then kind of fell away, or no? Is this just a new process? And why is the legal aspect why is it not in every state yet?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked how long it's existed. It's actually, the technology is really old. The technology of water cremation was actually invented in 1888. There's a man in England, Amos Herbert Hobson, who discovered it as a way to more safely get the diseased animal carcasses, and when they were having disease outbreaks with cows and whatnot, is a lot safer way to handle that than, say, burning them in a field, which is really toxic. And so he figured out that they could, essentially break down the cadavers of those livestock and return the leftovers like to the land as fertilizer, and just made a lot of sense. And then I think it went pretty dormant for quite some time until probably like the 90s. And then several brilliant people and organizations kind of started bringing this technology back to the forefront. So it started getting more widely adopted, especially in like veterinary settings. And so a lot of animals and our pets have been water cremated long before we were. And then it sort of got its footing in a medical setting. So places like the University of Florida, Mayo Clinic, UCLA, they started using it for their body donation programs because it was just so much simpler for them to take someone down the hall. They didn't have to take them all the way up to an offsite crematory. And so it's now creeping into the funeral industry, although there's certainly some slower adoption. And from a state, it has to be legalized at a state level, just like so many things that, the way that we have structured things, funeral laws are often done at the state level. And so we have to actually pass legislation in each state to get it legalized. And sometimes it's a priority for some states and sometimes it's not. So it's kind of a challenge. I believe we're at about 20 states now. So several on the West Coast, a few on the East Coast. Arizona just joined, Hawaii just legalized as well. And we hope to see that movement continue.
Yeah, and you will. All right. So I'm actually in North Carolina right now, and it is legal here in North Carolina. So yay to North Carolina. I absolutely love North Carolina and Charlotte. You are a beautiful state on so many levels. All right. How can we help to advance the legal aspect in states? How do we get involved in that? Is there an organization? How can we help?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the moment, what seems to be the best path is to contact a state representative, tell them that you want these greener options, and some, maybe it makes sense to approve water cremation and composting or natural organic reduction could all be in one bill. Maybe it's two separate, but really requires someone who's an elected official who's championing that through the process of legalization. And so contact your representatives and make your voice heard.
Always, right? With everything.
Yeah.
Okay, I love that. So you are based out of Denver, Colorado, which I love. So my question to you is, if my mom died in New York and I wanted to have you have a water cremation, can I have her body transported to you?
You can, yes. So that's something that initially I struggled a little bit with that, right? Because we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint.
Right, there you go. Okay.
And though what, is something that to consider is that a lot of times what is happening is that folks are transported in the cargo holding areas of planes that are already flying anyway. So yes, it is definitely possible. What we do is we work with usually a funeral home or a funeral director in that state of origin where the person passes. And then we're able to get the permits required to transport them to us, and we can still carry out the water cremation process. So that cost can vary based on where you are and when, and a lot of variables. And it definitely is possible, and something that we have done many times.
Yeah, so I'm just asking because, I mean, obviously the ideal thing is that we're going to be able to have this available to everyone in every state. But in the meantime, if somebody really finds this, that they want this option, I just want to let them know that there is that possibility for doing it, which is wonderful. So what would you say to somebody who wants to get involved in actually one of the states having one of these businesses and offering this? How do they start doing that?
Yeah, I mean, the most probably the path of least resistance is you're already in the space offering different types of body care, then add this to your offerings, expand your offerings. And I can say that that's not the only way. I certainly, didn't come from it in that way. I'm not a trained funeral director. I was more, I have a business background. And so I have funeral directors on my team and spearheaded the opening of our location here. And I've had many people reach out to me. Often they are like doulas or, former hospice workers who are passionate about this. And, try to encourage them that there is a path forward. You have to know your laws and have the correct support in place, and it's possible to do and to bring to your state. So I have a pretty open door in terms of talking to folks who are interested in seriously considering doing something like that where they live. And we want it to be widely available.
Yeah, I love that so much. I feel like, again, it's kind of how the death doula giver movement happened. It happened because of the people wanting it. It happened because we went out into communities and said, well, let's just teach you how to care for your loved one. Let's just have this conversation. And all of a sudden they were, asking hospices, do you have doulas? And I want a doula. And I think the same thing will happen here, is that when the consumer, by the way, all the power is in your pocket. So we have so much control over where we spend our money and what we want. And again, this has such a positive impact on so many levels, that if you want this option, and that comes with these conversations, is to contact your legislation, ask your funeral home, do they have this option? And if they don't, let's put it together. Let's make it happen. It's just incredibly beautiful. And now is the moment, because, in this country alone, we have 75 million people over the age of 65. If each one of them gets embalmed and is put in a non-biodegradable casket with that vault, I mean, we're already seeing what's happening here. This is our moment. And again, when it's never telling you what you should choose, but I want you to know you have options. And for me personally, knowing that I could have a positive impact on the planet after I'm not here is just something that lights me up and just fills my heart. And I think it resonates with so many people. So Emily, you have started something. It's like your mother, your stepmom, and you, something that is so beautiful and powerful. And I want to thank you for that, because I think you're sparking just, people all over on so many levels to have this option, but maybe even to be part of the movement. And I want to thank you so much for that. So how can people find out more about you and get in touch with you?
Yes, so you can find us online. We're at beatree.life. You can find us on social media. We're on Facebook and Instagram. If you just search for Be a Tree Cremation there. And we love to connect, and, really radical transparency for us is so important. And I think it's the anecdote to what we've experienced in the death care space over the past many decades of having it be behind a curtain. So we want to connect with folks and build community and really draw back that curtain. So we'd love to have a conversation.
Oh, that's so great. So once again, water cremations and what it does, it's financially, environmentally, and spiritually, such a wonderful option. So if this is something that you feel that you want to do, please contact Emily, or again, you can leave a comment below, and all her links are below. So Emily, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Suzanne.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much again. This was Ask a Death Doula. I'm your host, Suzanne O'Brien. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, everybody.